It's almost the big day and Christmas is nearly here. Some of you will be getting a brand new copy of FC25 as a present, and you might be looking for some ideas for your very first save. If you already own the game, then don't worry, these ideas will still be really fun for you to use and should definitely help to tide you over until 2025. Either way, let's waste no time at all and get straight into the first idea. So, the first idea I really like is rebuilding Watford. Watford haven't been in the Premier League since FIFA 22, which is a little bit weird because they were yo-yoing between the Championship and the Premier League for about a decade in the 2010s. You might remember the Watford team that had Gerard Deulofeu, Troy Deeney, Will Hughes and Moussa Sissoko in it, but you might also be shocked to find out that Moussa Sissoko has actually returned to Watford and is playing in the Championship. Thanks to the new live start point feature, you can actually take over Watford in a pretty good position. They're just outside of the Championship playoffs with about half of the season played, and that's great because it means you can play a couple of games, use these matches to figure out which players you like or which players you hate, and then use their pretty decent budget to improve almost straight away in the January transfer window. Of course, the goal is to push for the Premier League. I'm sure a lot of people will have already played with Watford this year, and if you have, make sure you leave any tips for playing with Watford in the comments below. I really recommend Watford because they have a pretty interesting history involving rock stars and finishing second in the Premier League in the early 80s. They have an interestingly balanced squad for a Championship club, and of course, they have very unique bright yellow kits. Watford, of course, also have a real stadium in the game thanks to being a Premier League regular last decade, and there are also plenty of mods out there that can add manager and player faces to almost every single player at Watford. Watford themselves don't actually have any wonder kids in their squad, but Vata, Kebban and Duomo can easily be developed into Premier League players, and if you're like me, you'll also enjoy signing some of their former players. Watford have so many cool options that you can sign once you get promoted. Nathan Ake, Richarlison, Etienne Capoue and João Pedro. This would give you one of the best cores to any team in the league, and of course, they all used to wear that famous Watford yellow. Rebuilding Watford isn't the longest save in this video, but it is possibly one of the most interesting and one of the most detailed with the amount of player faces and of course the fact that you end up in the Premier League. If you want to save the Premier League for a different save, then why not try and return Torino to glory? Out of every single club in Serie A, I would say Torino are probably the most boring one to be a fan of. They finish somewhere between 8th and 18th every year for the past decade, and even when they find a couple of very good players like Bremer, Belotti or Immobile, just when you think Torino could be returning to glory, they decide to sell them and rebuild their squad with players like Che Adams. However, despite not having the most exciting recent history, Torino are possibly the very best club on the game for a return to glory. If you didn't already know this, in the 1940s, Torino were 5 times champions of Italy and also contributed most of the Italian national team. Of course, there was a world war in that period, and in 1949, 31 of their players, staff and flight crew would sadly die in a horrific air disaster. After dominating Italian football, Torino would end up only getting one more title, and that would be in 1976. Recently though, there were rumours that Red Bull were interested in buying Torino, and maybe that could be part of the storyline to your save. Give yourself a few £1,000,000 of transfer takeover and see if you can win Serie A before the end of your career. It's nearly 50 years since the last Serie A win, and towards the end of your save in the 15th and final year, you're actually going to be on the 100th year anniversary of when Grande Torino really started to dominate in Italian football. Everything about this club just screams that it needs a rebuild, from the history to the actual squad. I mean, out of the 20 teams in Serie A, Torino have the 10th best team, which means they're pretty much exactly average for Serie A. If you look deeper into their squad though, they only really have one player who's world class, Duvan Zapata, but he's 33 years old now. Other than 2 really high potential centre midfielders, there's basically no one in this team that you really want to consider keeping. If you're interested in your first save being a really big rebuild with a very historic team, I don't think it gets any better than actually using Torino. If you want to try and find out what's actually changed in Creator Club this year, it has become a bit of a tradition for me to recommend you create FC Santa Claus every single Christmas. This is actually a real team that plays in the 6th division of Finland. They've managed to get as high as the 3rd division in the past, but then got put on the naughty list because they had debts of over €20,000, which at that level is a lot of money. To prevent bankruptcy happening on Christmas Eve 2019, this club actually travelled to Beijing, which was arranged by some of their new Chinese sponsors, and played a friendly match against a group of Chinese celebrities. The following year, they also returned to China for another exhibition match. This time they played against a team that had Del Piero and Michael Owen in it. Times must be really hard for Santa, but the iconic name and location of the club do give you opportunities that other 6th Division Finnish clubs just will not get. If you're wondering why they even are called FC Santa Claus, well, the team is from a town called Rovaniemi, which people in Finland consider to be the town in Lapland that Santa is actually from. I think this is such a cool idea for a save. It's so much better than Mansfield Town or Notts County being called FC Robin Hood, or New York City FC being called FC Spider-Man. As you'd expect, the team play in all red with white trim around the kit, just like Santa's outfit, and I just think FC Santa Claus is such a crazy idea, but could be really fun if you put them in the Swedish, Danish, or Norwegian leagues. If you would actually prefer using a real club from the Danish or one of the Scandinavian leagues, then there's actually only 2 teams on FIFA who exist as North as FC Santa Claus in the Arctic Circle. They're both in Norway, and Tromsø and Bodo Glimt are both slightly different standards of clubs. If you want an easy ride, go for Bodo Glimt, and if you want a tougher save, why not throw Tromsø in a Scandinavian Super League that you can take people like Copenhagen and Malmö and put them all together in the Norwegian League and see if you can somehow manage to win the lot. Okay, I can see not many people are going to play as FC Santa Claus, but don't worry because the next save is probably more popular. There's been a few times recently where a small Italian club had a massive talent come through, or maybe a group of them all at the same time. I remember about a decade ago when Pescara had Marco Verratti, Ciro Immobile, Gianluca Capriari and Lorenzo Insigne all playing for them when they were in Serie B. But more recently, Brescia had the crazy situation of being the worst team in the league, but also having the highest potential Italian player. If you compare this year's team to the one they had back on FIFA 20, it's a massive downgrade in basically every area. I'm sure you'd probably expect this because they have been relegated since then, and there's only so many times you can produce a 91 potential player like Sandro Tonali had back then. But this is a team that never really progresses beyond becoming relegation fodder in Serie A. In fact, in the 113 years that Brescia has existed, the club from near the Alps in northern Italy have only won 4 Serie B titles, and nothing else worth mentioning. They have such an empty trophy cabinet, but also have a reputation for providing shocks. One shock was signing Roberto Baggio just 7 years after he won the Ballon d'Or after they got promoted. So that's like them getting promoted this year and signing Luka Modric in Serie A. In his 4 seasons with Brescia, Baggio would score 46 goals in 101 appearances, and after he left, the club would fall away again and end up in Serie B. They're now actually one of the worst teams in Serie B 20 years later, and you'll have to rebuild the club twice. The first time is when you get promoted, and another time to try and instill the spirit of Baggio's mullet and see if you can qualify for Europe just like they did in the early 2000s. Okay, so this final idea doesn't actually involve a specific team. Instead, you'll be picking any team you want from League 2, where the lower the rating, the better, and for the first season, play as normal, but try to sell as many players from your starting squad as you can. You're selling these players to raise a bit of budget, but also because from Season 2 onwards, you're only allowed to use youth players. So make sure you buy the best 2 scouts you can afford by the end of Season 1. With all of your best real players gone, it's time to move on to Stage 2 of this idea. To help build your team up, set out 3 youth scouts with high experience and mid to low judgment. This is helpful because after the first season, you're only allowed to sign players from youth scouts that are worth under £200,000. In the second season, you can increase the limit to £400,000. In the third season, up to £600,000, and so on, so on. This means by the 5th season, you're looking at £1 million, and by season 10, you're looking at £2 million. You can sign as many young players as you want, just make sure to check the value before actually paying for them to join the academy. Of course, with this being a really restricted save, you're not allowed to sign players, even ones on pre-contracts, only youth academy players. To make it a little bit easier, I'll let you sell your youth players if you want to upgrade your youth scouts, but if you want to make it super extremely hard in your first save, the only way you can get rid of players is by letting their contracts expire. This should seriously slow down your progression, and I would guess it's probably going to take about 10 to 12 seasons to rise from League 2 to the Premier League, and it's going to be very lucky if you actually end up winning it throughout this save. Anyway, that's 5 pretty different saves that I think are very fun and people should really give a go. I mean, Watford are very different to Torino, and that's very different to FC Santa Claus, Brescia, and of course, if you want to pick a team in League 2, then that save is very, very difficult. But leave any ideas you have in the comments below. I can't wait to read them. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want to see some different kinds of FIFA content throughout the year, and I'll see you soon. Cheers and goodbye.